Hello, and welcome to the launch of From Chaos to Opportunity, our new white paper that looks at the future of the marketing function inside financial services brands. My name is Geraint Jones, and I'm Unclear M&C Saatchi's Global Marketing Director. It's great to see some old friends and new joining us for today's conversation. I can see Goldman Sachs, Aviva, Western Union, Barclays, Invesco, Barings, and many more joining the line. As an attendee, just for clarity, your camera and microphone are automatically switched off and you will not be able to turn them on accidentally, so you can completely relax. This session is being recorded and shared on our YouTube channel at Clear M&C Saatchi and also on our LinkedIn page, so welcome to our audience on those two channels. Finally, watch out for an email from Clear on Friday, tomorrow, with your copy of the white paper, which will be launching at the end of this session. For more content, events, and to watch recordings of this and other previous conversations, you can visit our website at clearstrategy.com or follow us on our YouTube page as discussed earlier. As we move into the show, should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom, probably on the right-hand side of the bar on your screen, and start your question with the name of the panelist that you'd like to answer. So for example, type Pam, and then your question if you'd like Pam to answer your question. Right, with that all done, let's get on with the show. So, for those of you who don't know, Clear is the growth consulting arm of the M&C Saatchi Group, and we found ourselves in the thick of helping brands to manage the chaos that the last 12 months has brought with it. From future scenario planning to rapid agile innovation, category strategy to portfolio management, brand repositioning to proposition development, we've sort of done it all in the last 12 months across a number of sectors. And the key goal has been to help brands to navigate a path through the really choppy waters of marketing strategy. And in amongst all that, I think we've seen a real change in how businesses are engaging with their marketing departments and their CMOs in a quest for growth. For a few years, it's been fashionable to beat up on the role of the CMO in the media, but our experience of this year has led us to believe that marketing and its leaders are having something of a renaissance. So we invested in a global study of nearly 700 CEOs, CMOs, and senior marketers to size and understand that shift and to help pinpoint how marketers can go on to cement a position of real strategic leadership in their organizations in the coming years. Today, Laura Cholton, our head of financial services in the UK, will walk through some new analysis focused on the role of marketing in financial services organizations before we debate some of the questions raised with our brilliant panel. So I'm delighted to welcome Pam Piligian, who is the Senior Vice President of Marketing Communications at Navy Federal Credit Union, the world's largest credit union and four-time recipient of Forrester's CX Index Best in Class ranking. Pam directs all marketing and advertising strategy, research, public and industry relations, brand and product campaigns, as well as overseeing metrics for Navy Federal brand, product and services. She excels at analysing market data, extrapolating the implications and turning insights into opportunities, and has a passion for member centricity. And in her spare time, she's an avid runner and has completed more than 41 marathons in 32 states with a goal of running marathons in all 50 states, which sounds exhausting. We're also joined by Andrea Linehan, Chief Marketing Officer at Currency Fair. Andrea is listed as one of the top 30 most influential fintech marketers of 2021. And after 10 years in the Middle East, she returned to Ireland in 2013 when she spent over 5 years as CMO of fintech startup Grid Finance. And she is now CMO at the fintech scale-up Currency Fair. Andrea sits on the board of the Irish International Business Network and is an advisory board member of the CMO Council. And until 2020, she was an advisory council member of the Small Firms Association in Ireland, a position she's held since 2016. She holds a BSc in finance, is a postgraduate of the Chartered Institute of Marketers, has an MBA from the University of Dublin Trinity College, and is a chartered management accountant, which also sounds exhausting. I'd also like to welcome Craig Welch. Craig is Chief Marketing Officer of NextGen, which is part of Euromoney Institutional Investor. Craig's a marketing leader who navigates organizations using a strategic digital-first approach and compelling storytelling. His passion for sharing stories doesn't stop at the office, and he moonlights as the host of Black Moss Partners Leaders Lounge podcast series, where his recent podcast guests include Alliance Bernstein's head of global tech and ops, and an executive coach whose client list includes Facebook, Apple, and Texas Instruments. Craig also currently is holding down 2 jobs, which I can tell you is also rather exhausting. So this incredibly busy panel is joined by our fantastic head of financial services, Laura Cholton. Laura's a director with over 10 years experience in insight and strategy, as well as Clear's UK head of financial services. In her time here, Laura has partnered with leading clients on a range of strategic challenges, including portfolio strategy, positioning, proposition development, innovation, and in identifying growth opportunities. Some of her previous clients in the space include Barclaycard, John Lewis Finance, Invesco, RBS, and Allianz, and she has a deep understanding and interest in the millennial and Gen Z audience and how established players can unlock that generational opportunity. I'm now going to set the scene for our conversation and then hand to Laura to go into some depth. So Laura, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, and we can get into the meat of the matter. So where did From Chaos to Opportunity come from? Well, as I said, we sort of ran a study at the end of last year called From Chaos to Clarity, which was a study into 700 CEOs and CMOs and their attitude to the future of the marketing function. And we found in that data a large number of CMOs and CEOs from the FS marketplace, around 300. So we decided to dive into some real depth with those clients to understand specifically the differences between the FS marketplace and the wider marketing marketplace. Next slide, please, Laura. So today I'm going to take you through methodology, then Laura's going to jump into the shape of chaos, and then we're all going to discuss the marketing opportunities that this presents for all of our potential attendees. So the question we wanted to answer was, in this chaotic, complex environment, how can financial services marketing leaders find a path out of the chaos to capture real opportunity? And the interesting part of this is that I think for many, chaos has been seen as a very relatively recent thing. But actually at Clear, we prefer to see chaos as pretty much a constant. Every sector at any given time is affected by its own perfect individual brand of chaos. That chaos could be large exogenous themes that are hitting your business in 10 years time or in 15 years time that you need to start thinking about now, or it could be small things that are happening at the very customer front line that you need to react to and have a position on very quickly. COVID is just one part of that. And I think it's super important to recognize that whilst this year has been incredibly tiring for many of us and incredibly challenging for many of us, actually this is potentially a moment where we need to get our heads up and look beyond this particular crisis towards crises that may be coming in the future. So the methodology was very simple. As I've said, we talked to 700 CEOs and CMOs, and over 300 of those were financial services respondents in the US, UK, China, Germany, and Singapore. And we did this in autumn, fall last year, when it looked like many of us were coming out of the crisis a little bit. So we get a bit of that sense in the data in terms of the positivity, obviously. But the most important part about this was that we spoke to your CEOs. It's all very well talking to marketers because we all have a perspective on our own homework. But actually having somebody else mark your homework is really hard, and particularly when that person marking your homework is typically your boss. So we wanted to understand their perspectives and to look for differential between what CEOs feel and what CMOs feel in order to unpack what marketing needs to do to wield more influence at board level.
Great.
I'm going to hand to Laura now to talk us through the shape.
Thanks, Geraint. And hello to everyone on the line and also at home. I guess to kick us off, I want to start off with a little bit of context about the different sorts of chaos that we've all been operating in for the past year or so. And Geraint touched on many of these things. So I think none of these things that you're seeing on the screen right now will probably be new news to you. But I think it's worth saying that as FS marketers, we've all been operating in a very complex and dynamic environment right now. Probably none of these things have been exclusively caused by COVID, but actually many of them have been accelerated by COVID and will continue to be shaped by the post-COVID landscape. The first one that I think we'd like to talk about is the experience revolution. So as we all know, digital finance is now the new normal. So this was always a big shift. We saw it happening pre-pandemic, but obviously has been massively fast-tracked by COVID. So the situation with limited branch openings, limited hours, even cash itself was often quite unwelcome due to hygiene concerns. This has all pushed consumers to the digital space, even when maybe before they might have been slightly nervous or uncomfortable about it. And interestingly, this might not be a short-term blip. Actually, many consumers are expecting to continue using digital going forward and probably will become a complete table stake for the FS customer experience going forward. I'd like to now ask one of our panelists, Pam, as someone that's working in a consumer-orientated business as yourself, what have you seen in the last 12 months? Have you seen your members shifting their behaviour? And how have you been tackling or will be tackling that digital revolution at Navy Federal?
Thank you, Laura, for asking. And yes, we have seen a shift. And your point is spot on relative to these were trends we were already seeing. COVID had just served as an accelerator. For us, it's a little bit different in that our member base, there's 10 million members, and we are founded around serving active duty veterans and their families. So active duty, for the most part, kept their jobs and were quite busy during COVID. Some of their spouses were impacted and lost their jobs. And the other part of our economy, we really saw kind of what we were seeing was really the true K model, where certain parts of the spectrum, certain members were drastically impacted, and then others were just drastically inconvenienced. And actually spent the time at home, did a lot of home improvements, saved money, didn't travel, spent more time with their families, while the other end of the side was really kind of struggling through this crisis. So we did see their engagement with digital accelerate. It's always been high. 50% of our members are less than 45 years old. So we already have a lot of digital natives as part of our member base. That said, branches are an important part of our delivery model. We did see that traffic decline, as you can understand. And we're really watching to see who's going to come back. How many of those, some of our survey data shows that those that transitioned to be only digital engaged are satisfied with the experience. I see the Chase stat in terms of 4/5 were saying that that's a preference. Our number wasn't quite that high, so we'll see. We still do think that the personal service, whether that happens for us in the call center 24/7 or in branches, is an important part of our service model and an important part of our CX experience actually for our members. But we're really watching to see if it will vary by segment, by origin, by age. So really just trying to keep up with the journey along the way, which I think is a theme for all of us in marketing on this transformation time, keeping up with the journey and lots of various pain points and pulse points for those on the other end of the spectrum.
Thanks so much, Pam. Thank you for that. The second, I guess, force of chaos that's worth mentioning, and as we all know, global economies have taken a massive hit as a result of COVID. So revenues and incomes for many FS businesses aren't expected to recover until about 2022 at earliest. Many companies are expecting big loan losses, especially when it comes to credit cards, commercial real estate, small business loans, etc. Just what that means for us working in FS companies is growth in established segments is likely to be a lot more challenging in the years to come, meaning that lots of FS businesses will be looking at new avenues for growth in the coming years. Craig, I'd like to come to you for comment on this. What impact do you think this economic instability may have on FS industry and, most importantly, actually FS growth plans 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, Laura, I think your question really sits to the heart of the theme of this conversation, chaos opportunity. Financial markets have had crises before, but this one, basically, if you took the power to the whole global economy and shut it off, and then you're trying to turn it back on, and you, to your point on this slide, governments are putting in trillions of dollars to start things back up. But there's going to be significant impact across the entire spectrum, from liquidity, capital, resources, cash flow. We may go into a global recession, funding, tax, trade, immigration. All of those things are going to have significant opportunities and also challenges. I think that as we've seen in the past, there's going to be winners and losers. And I think, quickly as you can figure out where the opportunities are, you're going to be reaping the rewards. I think in every kind of recession, has come out with new products and solutions. And, where I'm at right now, we talk to all types of financial services companies, and they're all working to figure out, okay, how do we rebound? Let's get off the defensive. Let's where the opportunities are. And even in the last client I was working with as Black Moss Partners, they were focusing on impact investing, and they're seeing a huge flow into that because of the pandemic and the focus on, I want to make investments, but my investments, I really need to understand if they're having some good in the total kind of ecosystem. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but as you said, significant challenges. How do you figure it out? And who does it best is going to be quite well suited. So I think whoever had their plans for 2021 a year ago, they might as well just throw that in the rubbish bin. It's not going to have any use. And you've got to think very agile and figure out how to have very short-term objectives to be successful.
So true. Thanks so much, Craig. That's brilliant. And I think we're going to probably return to quite a few of those themes that you just mentioned in the rest of our discussion. I think the last point that we wanted to mention in terms of chaos or disruption is the continued disruption coming from the fintech space. And actually, fintechs are ideally placed to capitalize on some of these trends, particularly the shift to digital. The pre-pandemic, maybe the lack of physical bricks and mortar presence was one of their major weaknesses. But actually, this wholesale shift to digital means that actually fintechs are now on a more level playing with traditional players. So it's likely that fintechs are going to bring even more disruption to the FS space in the future as they grow internationally and increasingly seek access to a banking license. So they're going to be even more of a competitive threat with the established players. And I'm going to come to you lastly, Andrea. I know you're going through a merger at the moment backed by Standard Charter, and I think many fintechs have used the last 12 months to kind of grow up and compete on that established basis. Do you think now is the time that established players should really be worried about fintechs? I think you're on mute, Andrea.
It's not so much now as the time. It was a natural progression, and this happens in all markets, not just in financial services. We've already heard the likes of Intuit buying Credit Karma. We know Fidelity acquired WorldPay, and a lot of it is because it's really difficult to innovate in a heavily regulated industry. So it's often easier just to buy in that innovation. But on the flip side, for startups, it is incredibly capital intensive to try and secure licenses in multiple jurisdictions. So again, it's easy to plug into another operations licensing system and reach across the world to leverage that. So they're the two big drivers, and it's exactly why our merger has come about. Standard Chartered themselves have wanted to move deeply into the payment space. Currency Fair as a currency exchange payments platform. We have licenses around the world already established. We have regulation. We live and breathe it. We know how to do that, how to work and acquire customers while carrying that regulatory burden. And then Assembly Payments, who we're merging with, don't have that reach, but what they have is deep tech and product payments ability. So combine those two together, and then obviously with standing on the shoulders of Standard Chartered, you all of a sudden have something incredibly significant. And it's all about economies of scale, economies of effort, sharing resources so you can accelerate global expansion. And that's what it's all about. But I don't think it's anything new to financial services. It was always going to happen.
I have a quick follow-up to that, if you don't mind, Andrea. Is it therefore now that we're going to see a significant amount of M&A? I mean, you're going through it right now. Do you see it as the stars are aligning for M&A more generally in the FS space?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's very also market driven, because customers are demanding assimilation of their experience. They don't want to hop between providers. They want it all in one place. And the only, you can API the hell out of everything, but the reality is it's still quite clunky, and people just really want it all somewhere neat and tidy to access it. But, it's even obviously there was a bit of a disaster with the Visa buying Plaid, for instance, and we're going to see that there's going to be a lot of scrutiny over those bigger deals, the ones that are in the 1 billion plus mark. That's not the range that we were in, but I think that's just demonstrative of how regulators and governments are really starting to pay attention to the consolidation that's happening in the market. So yeah, for so many reasons it makes sense, but obviously we want to make sure that it's done correctly and that competitiveness is maintained, because I think that's the main concern. And fintechs in particular, we've touted ourselves as the challengers to big banks, the challengers to big financial institutions, and all of a sudden now we're becoming one of them, and we're merging with them. And we got to think about the user sentiment towards that. It's are we challenging or are we becoming them? So I think there's going to be an interesting brand play on the whole fintech sector because of that, because it has become something quite different to what it was when it was first introduced to users.
Exciting times.
Yeah, very exciting times. Thanks all, that's really brilliant. And I think we've really brilliantly set up the challenge of the marketplace at the moment. It's pretty tough. I think as we've established that finding new paths for growth in FS is going to be likely, but also crucial amongst all this disruption, as Craig put it, rip up the marketing plan, start again. I think good news is that what we've learned from our study is that marketing leaders have a huge role to play in driving and influencing that strategy. From our study that we see that actually marketing has never been so influential within businesses, and the new frontier of FS marketers believe that they have the power to shape business growth. So that's really, really fantastic news for everyone who's an FS marketer at the moment. So what could go wrong? Well, a few things. So from our study, we have identified 3 forces for chaos, as we're calling them, that can undermine that growth and also limit the ability of FS marketers to drive their organizations forward. So I will start with each one and then we will invite our wonderful panel to comment. So the first issue that we've identified is around the unclear role for marketing within FS organizations. And what we mean by that is fundamentally, what is the marketing department for? Is it there to drive the strategy, or is it there just to execute the strategy? And actually, interestingly, in our study, we've seen a bit of a shift taking place. So I think historically, marketing's role was more rooted in executing that strategy, and we still do see this legacy in our data. So we still do see that FS CEOs still see marketing as the creative department to some extent. And I know that does resonate with my own sort of client experiences. Some of my old FS marketing clients used to say that their team was known as the leaflet department within the organization. I think the good news is that CMOs do see their department as a strategic growth driver within the business. And also from our data, increasingly, that's the role that their CEOs will want them to take in that business, in setting the strategy and driving it forward. But we also see that without a clear role within the organization, CMOs aren't always focusing in the right places. When we think of something like the 4 Ps, we often see that maybe FS marketers are focused a little bit too much on the promotion part of the 4 Ps, focused on capturing more market share, perhaps with existing products and services. What's interesting from our study is that CEOs are really focused, aren't really focused on that growing market share, potentially because, as we saw earlier, increasing growth from established sectors might be quite squeezed in the future. Instead, where they're really focused on is growing growth through new products and services. And that's actually a really big opportunity for marketers to leverage their unique perspectives on the customer and their unique perspectives on the competitors to drive that and create better products and services for the whole marketplace. So in effect, to really make sure that they are really focusing on all of the 4 Ps and not just ending up being pigeonholed into just looking after promotion. So I'll hand over to Geraint, who can kick us off with some discussion.
Well, I would if I'd come off mute. Thank you though for that. I thought that was a brilliant setup. I think I want to come to you first, Pam, to be honest, because I'd love to know how you've worked to really clarify that role of a modern marketing department in the eyes of your peers at board level.
Well, the nice thing at Navy Federal is the marketing role is well represented. We're a membership organization, so you have to join before you can buy anything or put your money even on deposit. So because of that, membership is driven often by marketing. So often we've been at the table, which has been nice. So that helps things. That said, to Laura's point, it's a duality in every way, shape, or form. You need to be a poet for the creative direction as well as a quant. You need to execute. I love the bifurcation. I wish we could all only drive strategy or only be a doer. But for us, we have found you have to be able to do both. And that's a special skill set. There's some folks that are very, very good at strategy, very talented at planning, but cannot look at executions and determine what needs to be done or what needs to be done next. So that bifurcation is, being able to drive the strategy, set the direction, set what needs to happen for the brand. And then particularly as you implement Agile, how do you execute along the way and learn along the way and pivot along the way and adjust the strategy? I love what Craig said about the plan. You have to throw it away. I think you have to throw it away, but I also think you have to, I think at one point for planning last year, I keep versions on my desktop in terms of focus. And I think by the time we hit November, I was at version 10. Some of it was, like other marketers, I'm sure we had the same experience relative to, we had a segmentation study. We did a segmentation of our members so that we could do a better job of knowing them and serving them better. Then after COVID hit, it really was invalid. So we ended up literally taking the segmentation study and saying, thank you, next. And really looking at some recession segmentation and, knowing who had gotten stimulus checks, who was getting unemployment checks, and trying to figure out what we could talk to them about. As a brand too, we always try to stay on the positive side. That was very hard when, there were so many uncertainties and, how did we navigate through that? That said, part of our mission was, how do we use social media and voice of the member to stay on top of what's happening? You probably have heard the lyrics from the old song. I think it was a Chris Christopherson song that was like, you don't paddle against the wave, against the current, you paddle with it. And then when you get really good, you can throw away the oars. And I think for COVID, none of us got to the stage where we could throw away the oars. But we did get better in terms of knowing what the waves were and how we could pivot along the way. But it really is about listening, lots and lots of member input, listening to different types of members, and then pivoting along the way to making sure that we're continuing to meet their needs and staying relevant.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've heard a lot of our clients talk to us about this need for agile strategy. It's something that we've been doing a lot of as a business for financial services businesses in particular. And one of the main drivers of that has been leaders, i.e. chief execs and even chief financial officers coming to their marketing departments and saying, you understand the customer, and that's the only way we're going to get out of this with any real understanding of which way is up. And Andrea, I know you've worked for CFOs who have become CEOs. How have you managed that kind of education process, that setting proper kind of objectives and keeping them appraised of what the role of marketing should be rather than what the marketing role is perhaps perceived to be?
I have, since my early 20s, have managed to have accountants as my CEO for a very, very long time. I became quite used to it, and it was, I'll admit, it was one of the reasons I ended up continuing on to get my management accountant qualifications, because, for me, I said, if I really want to be able to have that conversation at that level and speak that language, then I'm going to have to learn the language to bridge that gap. And, yes, I would also love my CEOs to go off and do some marketing qualifications so they can meet me halfway. But the reality is a CEO has to be much more of a generalist across multiple functions. It's not feasible for them to do that. But I certainly felt that that has helped hugely to deal with CEOs who are accountants in particular. But I might struggle if I dealt with CEOs who were came from the CTO track, for instance. That would definitely be a gap. I'm very fortunate in my current role at Currency Fair. Our CFO, she is absolutely understands marketing as an investment, has a real curiosity and interest in it. And because of that, the gap is actually quite tight. And I will go to her for peer advice on any major investment decisions I'm making on the marketing side. But I don't just keep that at myself and the CFO's level. I try to do the same amongst my own team and help them to have comfort around the language, the vernacular that the finance team have. And that's up to the CFO and the CMO to have those conversations with their teams and make sure that the gap is bridged the whole way along and not waiting until you get to the C-suite to make that happen. And that should be part of the training, and it should be from at all levels.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. We found in the study that one of the things that CEOs really want marketing to do from now on, if they haven't been doing it already, is to be the bridge between not just finance and marketing, but be the bridge between all sorts of different parts of the organization. Because as a result of the sort of multi-specialization within marketing over the last 10 or 15 years, we've all had to learn different languages. We've had to learn the language of data. We already knew the language of the customer. Then we've had to learn the language of technology. We've had to learn the language of finance in order to actually prove that our campaigns are working and have value. We've had to learn all sorts of language. And recently we've had to learn the language of customer experience to add into that mix. And so increasingly, and I think this is partly behind some of the responses in the data from some of the CEOs, I think they see marketers as one of the few places in the boardroom that they can turn to bridge those gaps, to who have a similar generalist outlook on the future growth opportunities for the business. And I think if marketing can become aware of that and wake up to that and double down on some of that, as my old boss used to say, Margaret Malloy, double click in on that. I think it's going to be really, really valuable for people in the marketing function. I'll come to you now, Craig, because I think we're sort of talking about what feels like a really good opportunity for marketers to take a real punt at having a real strategic role in the future of their business and a stake in it. Is it really that huge opportunity? Are we sort of making this up, or do you think this is actually something that's true? Are we at a bit of an epochal moment for marketing?
Yeah, we are. I think first we have to realize how we got it. It took a pandemic for us to get the opportunity. And I think that's important to understand because it puts some, I would say a sense of urgency around taking advantage of it. I mean, let's just be very honest. What we've asked to be a part of the strategy to drive we've always wanted that. We just never were given it. And now, CEOs are saying, hey, we need you, we need your help. So, and that's because their access and their ability for the other parts of the company, like sales and product, to have an engagement with the customer have been cut off. But who's the one group that continues to have access, even more access, engagement with the customer, is marketing based on the channels. So I absolutely think it's a 1 in 100 year, whatever you want to call it, but just remember how you got it. So just don't think it's going to stay. Like once things start to transition, you may see a lot of that stuff being taken away from you unless you're able to really show that, you can drive value. I think this is I'm excited about it, but I just want everyone to know, and I tell everyone on my team, we've got to act, with a sense of urgency around this opportunity.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. I think it's a lovely way to sum up the opportunity. I think it demonstrates the burning platform we all have behind us. Because I think you're right. We've been so rapid in our tactical responses to the COVID crisis that now all of our CEOs seem to think that we can act at that speed all the time. And as a result, we're now in a place where their expectations are so high, the bar has been set, and they now want to see where we can go from a strategic perspective. Let's talk about that kind of piece that we saw on Laura's slide, that sort of desire in the kind of CEO world to see marketing getting more and more heavily involved in NPD and NSD and making sure that they get to the front line with a marketing stamp on them. Andrea, how have you become more involved in that over your career? Do you feel you're involved enough? Should you be more involved than you are right now?
This is interesting. Again, I think qualifying as a management accountant has helped me in this realm, because if you take some very typical basic financial service products, debt, loans, saving, insurance, there are qualified experienced credit teams behind that, investment professionals behind that, actuaries behind that. And there is an expectation that marketers can go in, deep dive within these products and reverse engineer it into a new product for the market. And the reality is, again, it's another thing where we need these product specialists to meet us halfway, so that we can be more involved in that. And I do think a lot of marketers shy away from it because, particularly in financial services, these products are quite technical. We're not coming up with a new type of fresh cream bun here. You know, there's regulatory considerations behind it. There's execution. There's just financial instruments in general that go behind putting together a really basic consumer financial service product is quite complex, and that becomes it's a major barrier for marketers to be able to really contribute from that side. So look, I've had the advantage that I at least have the vernacular, the training to understand a few layers in around what happens around those kind of products to be able to reverse engineer. But that's not true of most marketers. And I think, again, this goes to our colleagues to kind of meet us halfway and involve us in those conversations, and simplify the language a bit, because if you can simplify it for us, we're the ones who need to simplify it again for the customer. So it has to be a meet in the middle episode.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, Pam, I'm interested in your perspective. When you look back over your career, have you seen any examples where actually in this situation, having a marketing perspective on this would have strengthened the product significantly? And has that caused a learning in the sort of non-marketing side of the business on an ongoing basis? And are you seeing that marketing over the last 5 years or so has become more involved?
I think so. One of the things for me that's a little bit unique is I started out on the agency side. So I have multiple decades on the agency world. So that affords you the opportunity to see at the same point in time, products and services, branding, marketing versus CPG, for example. And that's very different. I mean, when I think about my CPG background and experience, the work was all tested, very a lot of creative testing before we were rolling out with investments. The amount of inventory that we published was much smaller. It was very different. When you work on branding a service, which, let's face it, I think for financial institutions, most of the time, it's the service is the point of difference. Now, granted, there are some small product features that are a little bit different in terms of checking accounts or CDs or IRAs or credit cards, et cetera. But often the difference is the marketing of that service. So I think that does require a different type of relationship, because the service deliverers, if you will, for us, that's often a member service rep, which might be in a call center, or possibly in a branch, I tell a story in terms of thinking about how we ask those people to use data. And often for the call center reps, we'll have a system where we're calling the next best interaction. There's a suggestion in terms of based on what we see in the account, like what might make more sense for the member. That said, where I have seen our data work best is when I was in a branch, this was before COVID, in Texas, across the street from Fort Hood. And this officer walked in uniform. So right away, the member service rep knew how much she made. And he walked up to her and he handed her his paperwork and said, "I have found the perfect truck." And because her big data, which is different than the other things, her big data was his uniform. And she looked at it and basically knew what he made and knew right away that we weren't going to be able to approve him for this $50,000 truck. That said, the first words out of her mouth, which were the kind of thing as a marketeer you love, is, good news, I'm going to be able to approve you for an auto loan today. Bad news is it's not going to be that one. And then let me tell you why. And then went through what he could afford. And to me, that's a perfect example of if she wasn't, if she didn't have the right training or the right service, she never would have led with the positive. Here's what we can do for you. And let me figure out what exactly that number is. And literally that member left 30 minutes later with a pre-approval and, knew exactly what he could go buy and was very happy, even though if he had used another financial institution, he would have heard like, no, you can't be approved for that. So I think it's just a nice story to me in terms of just how it all has to work together, because our marketing can all talk about how members are the mission, we're driven to do the right thing, we want to do the right thing for the member, but the point of delivery and clarity and confirmation that the brain was doing the right thing comes with a member service rep who is astute enough in that case to look at a uniform and think about how much does this individual really.
It's a super story, because it brings us nicely in a segue to that new piece that we're increasingly being asked to look at with our clients. We've been working in customer experience for a number of years, but it's been a noticeable uptick in demand from our client base for consulting on how to map customer journeys, how to get involved with understanding customer behavior at the front line. Laura, how important is CX now in the world of marketing? Is it just another potential distraction from all of the more important stuff that we've got to worry about, or is it actually is it the thing we should all be worried about right now?
I think it's crucial, and I think Pam said it extremely well. A lot of the time in financial services, the differentiator is your service. Like there's sometimes not that much difference between different products. It's like tiny things. And I think it's crucial because I know I've worked with financial organizations that have been spending months and months and months honing this beautifully crafted brand building campaign or beautifully crafted positioning statement about how we're there for you, or we're by your side, or we're there 24/7. And then it completely falls down because the actual experience, which is being delivered by someone in a call center or someone in a branch, or the actual technical capabilities of their website, can't do that. And so therefore you end up spending tons and tons of money on maybe what was a brilliantly thought out campaign, for example, millions of pounds, and it completely falls flat because the experience doesn't match up to it. And I just think as marketeers, it means that we need to have a responsibility to make sure that when we're thinking about those big strategic moves or big messages that we're taking out about our brand, we need to make sure it matches up. We need to make sure that we're connecting the dots. And often I've dealt with marketers that don't actually have that power because it's dealt with by a different department. But I think what Craig was saying, marketing's got a seat at the table now. We have that permission to say, no, look, actually, if I'm going to be doing my job properly, attracting new customers, driving new products and services, 100% what we say needs to match what we do. And that's the CX.
Yeah, I think it's a good summary. I think if we move on now to look at the sort of the age-old crux of the challenge, I think we're going to talk about KPIs. Laura, if you want to share back up your screen and show us what we uncovered.
Let me know if this is moving.
Yes, that looks great.
Excellent. Yes, exactly. KPIs. So I think we've been talking a lot about this, but something that we saw in our survey was the misalignment sometimes of goals between CEOs and marketing. And this was a question we asked around, what do you think are the KPIs for the marketing department? And I think it's interesting that CMOs believe that they're being evaluated on KPIs such as growing market share, customer satisfaction, brand awareness, etc., all very important metrics. What we found was interesting, CEOs have quite a different perspective on this. They have a much more target-driven commercial perspective, probably no surprise, but they want their marketing team focused on hitting sales and revenue targets, hitting profit targets. I think what this highlights is this inherent tension that we've all been talking about, and you're basically stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's a desire from the top that they're being asked as CMOs, think long term, drive the strategy, but at the same time, you're also being told you've got to hit these short-term targets for Q4. You've got to be reactive to these constantly evolving situations. You've got to balance that long-term and that short-term. It's a very difficult juggling act to get right. And I think added to this, we see more evidence here around this misalignment when we look at what do they think were the biggest challenges facing marketers in the next 3 to 5 years. And it's quite an interesting difference between CEOs and CMOs. So CEOs are quite worried about the strategic value of marketing, making sure they're getting their bang for their buck, making sure that, you know, marketing is actually contributing towards those clear business strategies or objectives. In contrast, CMOs are actually, their challenges, they feel, are around more about the tactics of executing that strategy. They're worried about new marketing technologies, and they're worried about changing media landscape. Obviously, these things are very important. They can often be a bit of a distraction from the bigger questions. So I've had a few of my FS clients worrying about the latest social media platform, for example, and whether they should be doing more activity there or not. And I think before you can even answer that question, you need to take a step back and think, actually, but guys, are these channels actually relevant to who you want to be attracting into your brand? And before that, are you even clear on who you are targeting and where they consume media? So I think we see this tension again between strategic and tactical. And it's really tough for CMOs because they are being asked, as everyone's been said, to do 100 different things at once, play multiple different roles, liaise between all the different departments in the organization. And it can be hard for them to focus on what really matters. And I think for us, it's not about doing more because you're already doing too much as it is. It's probably about being choiceful about what you need to focus on.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to come to you, Craig, next. Yeah, this is hard because we're sitting there and we're being told we have to look long term. And you're telling us, quite rightly, that this is a once in a lifetime moment for marketers to take a seat at the table strategically. But we all also know that the pressure is on constantly to make sure we keep the lights on, because we're sort of not out of the woods yet. We know that, right? The economy, as we said earlier, is still on a pretty sharp edge as to what happens next. So whose fault is it? Should CEOs be forcing you to do the tactical and the strategic at the same time? And can you even do that in a world where your budget's been reduced and you've got a smaller team?
Well, look, I think the CEO is asking that of everybody in the C-suite. So, and I think, that's their job, right? I mean, they've got to do both, unfortunately. I think the challenge is, can you build a relationship, or can you get, I would say, the confidence of the CEO to allow you to really define how you're going to hit the short term and how you're going to hit the long term? Can you get that kind of agreement with them? Because I think for a lot of CMOs, especially in the B2B space, they're very reactive, right? So when the CEO says, I need you to do both, they actually think they need to do both. And that's what causes the burnout. That causes, when they go down to their staff, they don't understand why they're trying to, scramble around to do one thing one moment, but they're supposed to be thinking about brand awareness on the other. I think you've got to get to a point where you can say to the CEO, and maybe that's through giving him or her some significant short-term wins that allow you that that conversation where it's like, hey, look, I need to balance here because I won't be effective. I saw that the chart that Laura talked about, worrying about technology. That's understandable. Our budgets are, most of it's spent on technology, so we end up worrying so much about it. And I think, well, that's another challenge. So sorry for the long-winded answer. I think it's really around how do you gain the ability to craft your direction. And it may not be all of it, but at least to be able to say, hey, look, I need the opportunity and the budget and the resources to focus on some longer term objectives. And here's what they are. This is what I'm going to need. I'll give you the shorter term. Let's agree upon the ones that I can deliver that are going to impact the organization. But I also need the opportunity and the support for the longer term stuff and get that agreement. And then the benefit that's going to provide for the entire organization. And it's a tough conversation, but getting back to what we talked about before, this is a time they're listening, right? Because they're saying, I have no idea now what my customers want. They're going through chaos. You can help me understand that. This is going to be important. We need to think about new products and services. You can help me with that. So take this opportunity, as I said before, to kind of shape your role a bit more with the CEO?
Yeah, it's about a dialogue, I think. My chief exec, Damien Simons, he was on a podcast called the Uncensored CMO last week. It's worth a listen. It's really good. With a guy called John Evans, and they spent a bit of time talking about this winning small battles in order to buy yourself the sort of the permission really to go into that office and say, look, we've won these battles already. Here's some trust capital that I've built with you. You know, I've delivered on these things. We agreed on delivering these things. Now I'm going to say, I'm going to take one of those off the list, be choiceful, that is not worth his time now, because actually it's better off that we spend that chunk of time for my team to think strategically about what's happening 5 years hence, or what's happening next in the category, or what we're going to do about this particular fintech. And that's the key thing. And I think that's the beautiful opportunity we've got now, is that quite a lot of people have just spent a year winning tactical battles, and they probably have more trust capital in their back pocket than they think. Andrea, I know you want to talk about this as well. I mean, what's your perspective on this sort of battle on the KPIs front?
Yeah, I love the revenue piece, because I think this is our strongest foot for having that seat at the table, and a significant one. Why? Because we as marketers, and I'll pull sales within the marketing family, we have the strongest link to the revenue numbers. We have the strongest influence over them happening or not happening, other factors aside. The biggest issue is our CEO looks to us at those revenue numbers, and then turns and pivots, and then talks to the CFO about what that revenue number means for the business as a whole. It has an influence over the business's ability to raise debt capital, the cost of that debt capital, investment. It has a reams of, obviously, it's our runway as a business. It affects the whole, I don't want to use the cliche, but it is the lifeblood. The problem is that conversation isn't happening with us as CMOs. And what we don't realize is that, and we do realize, but I don't think we voice and have the conversations, is, you know, volatility, those short-term KPIs on revenue. Volatility in revenue does not look good to future investors, to the banks, to all these, to partners. And if we appreciate that actually our ownership of those revenue numbers is so significant to the overall business, but let's not hand that conversation over to the CEO to have with the CFO. Let's follow the conversation right through. And because the CEO wants to know that us as marketers appreciate and understand that volatility in revenue has this knock-on effect to the business doing all these other things, not just that marketing are or are not meeting KPIs. So we have to take that back. And instead of kind of us pushing back to the CEOs, give us a break, let us think about long-term, let's really own the power that those short-term numbers, the power of those that are in our hands, and the influence it has over the business, and learn to be able to talk about them. And instead then it's the CEO, CMO and CFO having that conversation together, rather than it be siloed and separate. Yeah. So I just see this as a massive opportunity to shift how CEOs are looking at CMOs.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We had a guy called Mark Evans, who is Managing Director of Marketing and Digital, on my Points of Clarity podcast a few weeks ago, and he talked about this responsibility of marketing to get past the sort of the 2-year churn, you know, that moment where the CMO disappears after 18 months, 2 years, and when they're past that, to get into that room as a part of a troika. Because there is this sense that, you know, marketing in the broader survey was seen as the sort of second most influential role around the table after finance. And yet we're still being told that 80% of CMOs don't trust their CMO. So we're trying to get to a place where that trust piece is bridged by the revenue piece and by the understanding of the numbers, not just the delivery of them, but the understanding of the lack of delivery and what impacts that has on the business. And that's a step change. I think we're going to move on quickly because we've only got a few minutes left. And I do want to make sure we talk for a couple of minutes about the talent piece that we know we have and the talent challenge we have coming up. And I'm going to come to you, Pam, on that once Laura's shared the challenge.
Thanks, Brian. Is that coming up properly?
It is.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think you're right.
Oh.
I'm unmuted. There we go. Can everyone hear me now? Yes, I think Brian's already touched upon it. There's we all know that there's quite a frequent rotation of CMOs in some organisations, and that has a massive impact on the consistency of the strategy. I mean, personally, from personal experience, I know that with some of our clients, our agency has actually outlived about 2 or 3 CMOs, And now we're the only people who are really familiar with the overarching long-term brand strategy. But in our data, we've uncovered a kind of bigger problem around the talent crisis. We've found that actually only 9% of sort of senior marketeers actually are aspiring to be CMOs in the future. And I think really interestingly, this number is actually much lower than we found in other industries. So it does seem to be a particular challenge within FS marketing organizations. And when we look at where these senior marketers do want to go, actually quite varied actually. 29% want to be CEO, 22 aspire to be another board position, and then 19% want to move out into consulting and 9% into venture capital or private equity. But what it suggests is that these people who are senior marketeers are open to senior or C-suite positions, but there's something about the CMO in particular role that they're not as attracted to. And even more worrying, is not necessarily something that's keeping people up at night. So only 8% of FS CMOs said that attracting and retaining talent to the industry was one of their biggest challenges in the next 3 to 5 years. And I guess from my perspective, this worries me because I worry about the impact on the products and services that are going out to the end customer. If no one's aspiring to be the CMO and take that leadership and be the voice of the customer, as everyone's just talked about it, what does that mean for the importance of the customer within that organization and the impact on what we're actually delivering back to the wider organization?
Thank you, Laura. Pam, wow, sorry, we're throwing this at you, but you've got a big team at Navy Federal. How do you create pathways to leadership for your talent? And how do you make sure that all sorts of diversity of thought is welcomed in that team and given the space to breathe and flourish, so that they feel like they can one day reach that senior role and do it with pizzazz and elan and the capabilities that we all want to have when we get to senior role?
Well, it is a challenge. I am a little bit, I'm blessed to work at Navy Federal. I've been there almost 4 years next month. And what I have found is, first of all, our CEO was the CMO. We don't really have a CMO title, but she was C-suite, ran marketing, and then also ran one of the channels, and then ran 2 of the channels, and then got to be the CEO. So I think in some ways that shows people that there's credibility from that path to be, to be the CEO if you want to be the CEO someday. I also think that marketing people, this is my theory, so it's worth what it costs you nothing. I think marketing people are also lifelong learners. So I think we have a little bit of ADD on our own careers. Like, oh, I love technology. Oh, I'd love to be a consultant. Or maybe I'll sell baskets at the beach. Like, it'll be entirely different. I think about this personally. My husband retired from investment banking after 30 years. And I said, what would you want to do next? He knew right away. He was like, I would teach stats to high school students. And I was like, wow, to know that is amazing. And if I think about myself, my list would probably be similar to the one you put up here. Maybe I'll do some consulting. Maybe I'll go to a startup, or maybe I'll sell baskets at the beach. So it would be very diverse, but I think that's part of what makes people that thrive in marketing. We are that multidisciplinary, but we also tend to be attracted by sometimes the next thing, because part of our job has been keeping our pulse on that particular factor or asset. I know that just like you were talking about trust from the CEO, trusting the CMO to get the job done, whatever the job is. That trust is imperative. It's also for our team members. They have to know that we've got their back. They can trust us to do the right thing. They can trust us to represent their point of view, whether it was with the data or with the creative work or with the agency partner. And we work every day to put deposits in that trust bank, because we also know that we don't control all the situations. So there's going to be times you trusted me, and I'm also going to let you down because of what happened, or because of a situation we couldn't control, or circumstances. Things happen. We had a fabulous, really fun campaign idea planned for April Fool's last year. We were going to do a name change. And we had already approved the concepts, we're off and running. And then we said, no, we can't do this. People are not laughing. People are dying. We're not going to do this. And we scrapped it. And we all got together and had a little funeral for it and said, this is the death of an idea but we celebrated the idea too. Nobody externally saw the idea, but internally we needed to recognize that this is going to be a hole. And how do we recognize that and move on from it? So sometimes it's part of that, showing that you trust them and that you believe in them for the future, and also celebrate with them as well as weep with them.
Yeah, we've all been there and had a funeral for an idea or two. I know that for a fact. Laura, I'm going to hand back to you just to finish off. We're right up against time, but we're just going to wrap up with a few key pointers to take away, and then we'll say thank you.
Yes, I just want to end on a point of positivity. I think we've all been talking about, even though it's been super tough and there's been a lot of churn in the last 12 months, I think we've been all talking about, I guess, the opportunity. And Craig, I think, said it right. So we have a unique role as marketers and a unique power. We know the customer and the competitive landscape like no one else in that business. And as Craig put it, the CEO is listening right now. So take this opportunity, seize it, push that place at the table in the C-suite, and help to really push and define that strategy going beyond. And it's about not doing more. We've all talked about the balancing act between the short term, the long term, but actually it's about thinking about new. So not getting distracted by the latest tactical thing, focusing on your path, what you want to achieve, and then thinking about the best way to do it and not getting distracted. And lastly, we've all talked about this. I think it's been really interesting to hear about the versatility of marketers that we have on the call. It's about mixing it up. So as Andrea said, it's about learning the new language, meeting your colleagues halfway, but throwing yourself into it, learning a new skill set, encouraging that cross collaboration. And as marketers, I think, and I think Pam mentioned this, our sheer versatility is somehow our downfall. It means that we're often distracted by new things and moving off into different roles. But actually, it puts us in a great position to embrace some of these extremely challenging situations. The sheer adaptability of marketers means that we are in a brilliant position to embrace these challenges and drive our organizations forward. So we have a lot of confidence in our ability to do so. And thank you all to our panel for some brilliant insights.
Yes, thank you to Pam, thank you to Andrea, thank you to Craig for joining us this afternoon and this morning. It's been a fascinating discussion. It genuinely has been full of really powerful insight. I think our audience have really enjoyed what they've had to hear. And thank you so much for your time as audience members as well. You will all get a copy of the report in your inbox tomorrow morning. Have a read. And if you've got any questions at all, feel free to drop Laura or I an email, and our details will be in the back of the report. So thank you so much for all of your time, and we'll see you hopefully again on the next one. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.